Welcome to the Books Applied podcast, presented by WSL Leadership. In this podcast, we talk about an awesome book and how to apply it to your work, sport, or life. I'm your host, Iggy Perillo. Thanks for joining me. Hello. On today's episode, we are talking about The Inner Game of Tennis, a book by W. Timothy Gallwey. And with me today is my special guest, Lauren Chadema. Lauren, tell us a little bit about what you do and how this book came into your world.
Hi, Iggy. First of all, thank you so much for having me. This is so much fun and such a great book to talk about.
Oh, I know. You said you love this book. I'm like, we need to talk about this book. So yes, tell us about you.
I know. And well, you know how this book came into my life is I was I went through a small business coaching program, and I had this coach, a small business coach. And what I do is my company is Intentional Acting, and I'm hired by working actors who are getting passed over, and what they want is to book more work now and build a reputation of being an in-demand actor. And so I work and live in Hollywood. I have online classes all over and can work with anybody all over the world. And I'm very passionate and I love what I do. And have developed this step-by-step repeatable acting technique that is really kind of, I don't know the right word here, there doesn't exist anything like that in the acting world. And that's kind of where it came from, is because I was like, if somebody taught you how to build a house or how to bake a cake or cook something, you're going to somebody's going to give you step-by-step instructions.
Mm-hmm.
These are the tools, and then you do this, then you do this, and do this. And what I found in acting is, even with a master's degree, I walked out and I'm like, okay, what do I do now? What do I do first? And okay, memorize lines. Well, and so acting's really taught by a lot of concepts and philosophies and ideas, and it's not really a formula or a step-by-step technique. And so as I was teaching, and because I'm award-winning director and teacher and also an actor, and so in doing all of this, I developed this technique. But then the marketing and the sales of it, I'm in a very saturated market where there's lots of competition. So I went to this SBA, coach. And while I was working with him, he said, you got to read this book, The Inner Game of Tennis. And of course, my first thought is, tennis?
Yeah, right, exactly.
What does tennis have to do with acting and with my business? He's like, no, you have to read this book. And as I was talking about my business and talking about what I do, he's like, you have to read this book. Well, it took a while for me to pick this up, honestly, because I bought it instantly. But then I was like, no. And it's the classic, one of the things I guess we need to really mention, it says the classic guide to the mental side of peak performance.
Right, exactly.
Right? So this is the mental side of peak performance. And although he's so brilliantly written, he's such a good writer, and why I know that he's a good writer is because he takes this game of tennis and how he was a pro coach for tennis, but he does it in such a specific, such a way and such a lens that it is a prism for all of life. And that's something that I've learned is, particularly even in acting, is when you make a choice or when you are doing something, the more specific it is, it's just like a prism, that when you shine that light at a specific point into a prism, out comes a rainbow of colors. And that's what he does with this book, is he's so specific that anybody, but maybe not, but everybody in so many different ways can relate to this, to relate to it and put it into their terms. So I don't remember if I started reading it first or I just assigned it to my class.
Great.
So what I did is I have a master class, And in my master class, and these students have been around, what are we talking about? What do we want? They want peak performance. I mean, if you're in Hollywood, you're competing with, 2 to 3,000 people just to get called in, really, or just to get called in. That's how many people are being submitted for one role. And one of the things that I say is that you're more likely to get a gold medal at the Olympics than you are to get an Oscar. I mean,
that's true. There's more of those out there.
Yeah, there's more. It's better odds. So we are talking about you've got to be at your peak performance. So I assigned it to my master class, my level 4 class. And particularly one student was like, oh my God, this book.
Oh yeah, like they didn't like it. They thought it was or they weren't into it.
It was just singing to them.
Oh, okay.
Singing, that's what I mean by oh my God.
It blew them away. Okay,
blew them, like mind blown, like wow, whoa. So what we started doing is reading it in class. So now, because I have too many books going in my life. I don't know about you, but I tend to, have a different book for a different mood or whatever, and audiobooks and all that stuff. And so if we read a little bit in class, then we're all talking about it and sharing it. And then again, that prism of like everybody's takeaway from it. And there've been a couple things where I read it and I just like go, oh, I don't get that. And then somebody else in the class will talk about it. And it's powerful, and it relates so much to acting. It's helped me with my personal life, with my husband, with my
sure.
Like, it's a brilliant.
Yeah, I work actually with a lot of athletes, and I think so. When I read it, I'm like, oh, this actually has peak performance for me was athletic peak performance. But you're right; it does pertain to everything, and it's interesting because one of the big ideas that comes out of this book, one of the most succinct ideas is don't try too hard. And in many sports, if you try too hard, you're tight, it looks awkward, it's weird. And I am not an actor, but it makes me think of in the acting world, I don't know if you saw 30 Rock when Jack, he's like, wait, when I walk, does my arm go with my leg or opposite my leg? And so he's like just thinking too hard about how to walk because he's, taking on this little acting role. And suddenly he's like super awkwardly moving around because he's trying too hard, right? And I think that is... And it's counterintuitive. Like, you want to be a peak performer, don't try too hard. And really, I think this is about flow state, right? Like how we are flowing through what we're doing, how we are embodying it, and also not thinking about it too much. And I'm sure you've seen it. We both have seen this in our realms of the people think too hard, they try too hard. In my world, people physically get tight. They're not in the right place at the right time. Like you can see their brain is literally slowing down what they're trying to be doing with their other teammates, on the track, at the same time.
Yeah, because that's great. I love the way you just said that, because that's the note that I always got as an actor and all the way through graduate school was, Lauren, you're trying too hard. Don't try so hard. And that's kind of a really result-oriented statement. And it's like, well, I want to be the best I can be. How do I not try too hard, right? And that's the biggest thing for an actor is how to get into that flow state. But I think it's for everybody. So I'm curious, how did you pick up the book?
I don't even remember now. Like, the book was written in the 70s, so it predates me as a human. And slightly predates me as a human. I'm not sure how I came across it. I don't even remember. But I remember I feel like there's like groups of people I work with that it becomes very popular and they're like, everyone's reading this book. And then, it kind of goes under the radar for a little while. Then I encounter another group of people like, oh my gosh, have you read this book? Like, it keeps flowing, has its like moments of popularity in my world somehow. So I don't even know how I came across it. But I think it really had a lot to do with athletic performance. I worked with a lot of athletes, just over time, and people in leadership roles, right? And that's another place where like nuance and subtlety really matter because if you come across too strong or you come across too hard or you're trying too hard, you land as inauthentic. And inauthentic for a leader is not building respect, not building trust, and kind of degrades the culture that you're creating around you if you don't come across as authentic. So those sort of two spaces, and I think that's probably where this has come and gone throughout my life a few times. But he does talk about the outer game. Like, you need the skills of your game. Like, as a tennis player, he's like, you need to know the sport. You need muscle. You need, whatever. But to actually do the sport well, you need to not be thinking about it. And I think there's this, the educator side of me talks about there's these sort of levels of competence. So you're unconsciously incompetent. Have you heard about these before? Yeah, I see you nodding. Where you don't even know what you don't know. You're like, I'm just doing this thing. What's this, a racket? I don't know. But then you become consciously incompetent. Like, oh, I know I'm not doing this right. Or like, I know this is not how it needs to be. And I think people sometimes get stuck there. But then they can move also to being consciously competent. Like, oh, I know I'm doing this right. And this is how I do it right. Like, you have to be thinking through the different steps and what it is. Like, oh, this is how he talks a lot about tennis serves, which I think is this beautiful metaphor. Like, oh, this is how I serve in tennis. Got it. But then the next step is unconsciously competent. So I'm not thinking through the steps. Like, I throw the ball like this, I position myself like this. I just do it and I flow through that whole motion. And that's where I'm at peak performance, when I'm not thinking about the different steps. So unconsciously, this move, that little timeline, I guess, spectrum, has been sort of very present in the world of education that I've been delivering for years and years in sort of these different areas. And he really nails it in terms of, this unconscious competence. You can train yourself to get there. You don't have to be stuck in either consciously incompetent or consciously competent, like thinking through every step by step by step. And it is true. It applies to so many different areas of the world and life. And I think we both feel in this role as an educator. And so we're trying to help people move through these different steps. And if they hold on too tightly to any one of them, it limits their potential. It limits sort of the flow that they can get into. And I think we both are in spaces where flow is so important. And that flow is intangible in a certain way, and that's the inner game, because it's subjective, it's internal, versus the outer game. I know my tools, I know my craft, I know my different things sort of out there.
Absolutely. And with an actor, that's everything, because when they are in that flow, it's when as an actor myself, it's when I feel transported into the world of the character. And what they call that in acting is being the character, like, but how you get there is, there's a million different ways, or people describe it in different ways. And that's what I've done, is go like, how do you get there and repeat it? Because the other thing that can happen is that you get there, but then, and you're like, whoa, where did that come from? And I wonder where is that in that scale of those things,
that's repeatable. Yeah.
Well, that it's kind of like you're unconsciously competent at some point. Do you know?
Right. You're like, how did I do that? Like that part a little bit. I think that is the good amateur, right? Like the good amateur is like, I can do this thing. I got it. Sometimes.
There's also a lot of pros. That's the thing about acting, because it's not like this specific step-by-step formula that can happen with pros, that they're like, that the pros are like, well, I got this amazing, I had this great moment, but I don't know how to get back to it over and over again, especially if you're like on set with 100 people looking at you, and you gotta cry on cue. And how do you make that? And then an airplane goes through the sound, the audio of that, and they're like, yep, got to do that again. Like, that's hard.
Oh, yeah.
And that's really about the flow. How do you work in that flow, right?
Yeah. Well, how do you access that on demand, essentially? And the same is true for leaders, right? Like, how do I actually embody this authenticity, but really actually kind of consistently? Like, I need to be consistent about this, versus if I seem inconsistent, or if I can't on demand be an emotionally intelligent person, the psychological safety, my space is just going to tank, because people won't know what to expect of me as a person in a leadership role, or as an athlete on the track, or as apparently an actor on set. Like, people are like, get it together. Like, come on.
Yeah, I find it interesting you talk about an athlete on the track, because one of the people that I've worked with is Blake Lieber, who is a Paralympian Blade Runner.
Okay.
He's a gold medalist Paralympian Blade Runner. And so we found a lot of connections between the running and the technique of running, and then and where that flow comes in, and acting, right? And that it is at some point where your technique is so repeated, so it's so second nature, that you've done it so much that it's second nature, that's when that flow comes in.
Yes.
But then when you're like standing there on the, as he talked about, being on the field of the Olympics, and walking out there and going, oh my God, I'm finally at the Olympics. I made my goal. And I think for an actor, they're going, and, I've seen actors have told me, like, oh, I'm now standing in front of Martin Scorsese and my knees are knocking, like how to access that in those moments of high pressure. And in like for a CEO, for a leader, same thing. Now you are finally the CEO of this big Fortune 100 or 500 company, and you've got to get up and speak. How do you, excuse me, access that, right? And in this book, like the other thing that I thought was so powerful was this natural learning. And he talks about the natural learning. And that was really powerful for me as a mother, too. Like allowing my son to, instead of getting micromanaging, being a helicopter parent, well, like, no, you need to do this, you need to do that. I can get that way, and realizing that I have to allow him to have his natural learning, and that's what he talks about in this book. And I was just like blown away because it was so, he articulates it. That's the other thing is so amazing, is this, like, how he calls I'm to admit to over teaching as a pro. And and I can see when I've overtaught and taught, and I can also see where I've over directed an actor, like on set, and where that flow and where you've done it so many times, but now the flow's gone.
Right. It's noticeable.
Taught, right? Oh my God, that happens a lot with actors, right?
Yeah, it's you have to allow the people to have an experiential moment with that topic, with that moment. Like, they have to be there to experience versus thinking about experiencing it. I think that's probably something we both have in common when we work with folks. Like, don't think about doing it and just do it, which is easier said than done, obviously.
Obviously, and also the trusting the imperfection of it. That's what I also liked. And this whole, I have to say, if I had any criticism on the book, it would be one thing. I wish.
Oh, okay. Tell me.
Named self 1 and self 2, because when I find myself talking about it, I'm like, is that self 1 or is that self 2? I get a little confused, because so the way I understand it is that self 1 is the ego. Like, that's the ego driven mind. That's the part of the mind that's so conscious and working hard and trying and wants to, and it's the ego. And then and self 2 is kind of more of that, is that I'll call it a spiritual self, or what would it be? It's not the ego, and and like he talks about really allowing, like, and how much that's, I mean, when he's talking about particularly the serve or the hit and coming around and the ball's in front of you, and like, look at where the ball's going instead of focusing on that's the other thing. I think it's not just don't try too hard. That is a really important piece of it, but it's also about where do you focus?
Yes. I love that part. Right? Yeah.
And so what are you focusing on? And in acting, one of the things that so many actors focus on, their lines. And one of the questions of the 9 questions of intentional acting that I created and teach is, who's the most important person in the scene, right? Because what happens is and that's what this book is, because when we focus on ourselves, all of a sudden I can go like, oh, wait, in fact, I'm even thinking about it. This morning, I saw something in my tooth. Did I get that out? Like, does my hair look okay? And then, wait, that I'm stumbling, and that doesn't sound right. Now, because all the focus is on me. And when I put all that focus on me, all of a sudden I get nervous.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden I can't do something right, And
right. Self-conscious, like the worst part of self-consciousness, like being so self-conscious that you're like, all I can see is myself, and be judgmental. I think that being self-conscious and there's being self-judgmental, which is like the slipperiest of slopes.
Exactly. In anything. Like, I'm thinking about when I was waiting tables, and I had this, she was an owner and a manager, and she was difficult. I'll say that.
Okay.
To be polite.
Right,
honestly.
right.
but she was on me. And then the second that she got on me, you didn't do this, you didn't do that, you didn't do this, you didn't do that. I just started to fall apart.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. We can't handle that level of critique on ourselves, and so many of us do that to ourselves too, which is this beautiful part of this book that we are doing that. Like that's a little bit of self. One is that judgmental voice in our heads being like, "Did you do that right? Oh wait." He talks about it in sport, like, oh, like his mental game to mess up other players is to tell them they did a good job of their last serve, which is so beautiful, right? Like he's like playing at like high level mind games. So we're telling ourselves like, oh, that sucked, whatever. But if you did a good job of something, he'll be like, oh, that was a great serve. So then his opponent is thinking, that was a great serve. Oh, that was a great serve. Huh, that was a great serve. And so all they're thinking about is this past great serve moment. And, then they get super awkward and weird, and they're out of the flow of the moment because they're thinking about the past. Even if it was a positive judgment, they're not in this present moment anymore, flowing through their next serve, their next volley, like whatever it is. I'm like, I love it because it's the compliment versus like, oh, that sucked. Like we're already telling ourselves that was a bad job, or that's weird, or I feel awkward, or this is disjointed. So it was very funny, I thought.
Absolutely. And it's also what it says is that it's not only about the inner game of tennis for the, if you will, the athlete or the actor or the person doing the task or the sport or the event, right? It is about also, it's like the inner game of teaching, if you will. Like he could make a book of inner game of teaching. Or
he did a bunch more. He did a series of other books, by the way, which is very funny. I don't think teaching is one of them, but he said the inner game of work, by the way, I read, which was fascinating. It actually is a little more practical toward work. He did like the inner game of music and the inner game of
stress, outsmart life's challenges.
There you go. He has a couple, but teaching, like the inner game, like really, I can imagine. I haven't read all of his many books, but I can imagine the same sort of formula process, whatever it is to get you out of I think the colloquial would say, get out of your head. Yeah, get out of overteaching yourself.
As an overteacher, and I see so many directors and teachers do that, where they are over their and I've done it a million times where I'm over directing. I'm giving you every single note constantly, this and the actor just goes blank.
Oh yeah, it's too much.
And it's the same thing with an athlete, it's the same thing with a student. And when he talks about it, it's just say, here, focus on that and notice what happens.
Yeah, I love it because he's talking about tennis. And one of his techniques and his metaphors, I view them all as metaphors, but it's super practical. He talks about when the serve, when you're about to return a serve or you're returning a volley, he's like, just notice, pay attention only to the spin on the ball. That's it. You're just trying to see the ball coming in and seeing how it's spinning. Let everything else just happen how it happens. Focus only on the spin, which I thought was a fascinating way to, again, get you out of your super hyper body awareness. Like, I'm just looking at the spin. And I think there are these beautiful other applications to other places. Like what you were just saying, who's the most important person in this scene gets me out of my head thinking about my hair and am I at the right angle and my position of my arm or whatever, the hyper focus on the self. So what's the ball spin like? What is the... how's my tongue feel on the reed of my instrument? He talks about musicians a little bit. Like, that's all I'm thinking about is the feel of my oboe reed in my mouth. That's it. I'm not thinking about the note tone or quality, because again, I feel like these very nuanced, very subtle pieces of expertise need to flow naturally without thinking about them too hard. Like, how do I be the perfect, how do I respond to this conflict in a way that's optimal? Maybe you don't need to think about my step-by-step process for responding to conflict as a leader. Maybe I need to think about how am I listening to the person I'm listening to? That's it. Like if I just think about listening, I can disconnect myself from so many of these other checklists and process and, I need to follow these 10 steps and blah, all these different things that, again, move you out of the moment, make you feel and seem inauthentic in a way that don't help the situation because you're interacting with humans.
Yeah, and I think that's what's powerful about the book, as you just said, is listening. Like it can make you a better listener because you have to, instead of like judging and that, I think that's where it works on as you as an athlete or as the actor itself is that you or the teacher is that self one and self two is how do we listen to ourselves and what part do we listen to all that criticism, right?
Which does not help.
Of that self judgment. And by putting our focus over there on the other person or the spin of the ball or, I don't know how you do it in track, but what,
sure.
But, then when you do that then you are free. And it was interesting because Blake was talking about the flow, and he was like, he talks about the flow, and one of the things that's kind of amazing is what the body and what the brain, what the body and all your senses can do. And he talks about like in the Olympic, in a stadium, when he's on the track and he's running, that his coach is like telling him times, right?
Mm-hmm.
They'll
Okay.
say,
Okay.
okay, you're at, I don't know, like
Well,
30 seconds,
sure.
45 seconds, whatever, 10 meters and 45 seconds, right? So his coach is saying that to him, but that means there's what, how many? Like up to 8 other people on that track.
Oh, sure. Sure.
Coaches are yelling times too. And then
Mm-hmm.
you have the people in the crowd, the audience, right? And then you have the announcer and whatever other noise is going on, right? And he said that in that peak performance, in that moment, all he hears is his coach's numbers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Doesn't hear anything else, so that focus, like in that peak performance, the ability for your brain, for your being and your brain to focus and let everything else flow. And that must be the same thing with like the spin of the ball.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Just listen to the numbers of the coach. Yeah, that's beautiful. And it's outside of yourself. It's still something that's not within you. It's something external that
Right.
is that you were sort of responding to, or is guiding you, but not that you're controlling, which is, I think, an intentional, part of this whole process.
Yeah, and I think you're right. This is the inner game of tennis. It's not how to play tennis.
Right,
Like,
absolutely.
and it's the inner game of acting. It's not how to act. You have to know how to do those things. You have to have that process, that technique. You need to practice that a gazillion times, so that then now it's how do you take it to that peak performance, to that next level. And the natural learning. And the other, what was the other one, when he talks about looking in the mirror? You're like, the person who has a bad, they go, oh, well, I know I spin my wrists when I do my forearm or my back arm. I always don't follow through, or I don't do this. So that when they're on the court, they're focused on not following through, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then he says, go look in the window. Do you remember that? He says, look in the window and watch you do it, and watch it naturally, and just watch it like one time in the window to see yourself, what you're doing. And once you have the awareness of it, that then your body will naturally even learn and shift,
Mm-hmm.
which is just so powerful.
Like providing that model for yourself, essentially.
Yes. Yes. I love the way you just said that. Yes. Because I just always think I have to will myself through
Right.
it. I have to work on it. I have to
Like force it. Like, yeah.
force it.
Make it happen. No, it's definitely not that approach.
And if you think about that, and if you think about that with like athletes, high level actors, and you're talking about like leaders, like we have all worked so hard to get where it is, that drive, that working hard, that ambition. That's what was so confusing for me, was that it is that we have all those things, that drive, that ambition. I'm going to work hard. I'm going to be disciplined. I'm going to sacrifice things to get where I want to go. And that's what it requires of people who are leaders, of athletes, of actors. It requires that kind of mindset,
Commitment, effort. Yeah.
right? But then when you get there, then to be told, don't try so hard.
Right. You're like, this is the mountain I've been climbing. And then I get here and you're like, yeah, well, slow down. And you're like, no. Yeah. It is. It really is counterintuitive, and it feels like the rug is being pulled out a little bit. But I think the focus is still. I mean, and this is, I think, the difference between performing well and peak performance, right? Like you need to be able to have that level of disconnect to really put yourself in that flow state, like on demand, essentially, or as called for by the situation at hand. Another thing that he talks about that I think directly pertains to acting, when he talks about people who are serving and they keep serving into the net and they keep serving into the net, and like, oh, well, I need to throw the ball higher and I need to like have my routine or whatever. And one of his actual coaching strategies is to say, hey, pretend like we are filming a commercial. We just need someone in the background serving a ball. It doesn't matter where the ball goes. You just, look like, we need someone to look like a tennis pro. Can you just like look like a tennis pro over there for a hot second while you're in the background serving, because this thing is happening over here? And suddenly people are like, oh, I just need to look like a pro tennis player? No problem. And then they start serving so much better because they are like, well, this is how a pro would look, and then suddenly like their serves are in, they're not hitting the net every time because they've disconnected from, oh, I need to get the ball over the net and I need to hit that, corner and whatever, to I just need to look good, which is a very funny way to disconnect the brain, though, from, wait, how's my wrist twisting? Like, did I throw the ball high enough? All those little pieces that are basically clogging their muscles from like flowing smoothly. And so the focus on looking good separated them from overthinking and separated them from, being too tight and too focused on like, oh, I need to like 70 mile, whatever, a million mile per hour serve, whatever it is,
right,
was not as relevant and not helpful for these folks.
And with actors, to me, that's often when I say, just go screw it up. Just screw it up. Like, let's do it one more time, and I want you to do it wrong. And
okay, yeah.
Go so big that you're sure I'm going to say, oh, God, make that smaller for the camera. and just do it wrong. And and try something new, and that's exactly what they do. And it's so interesting because in college and in graduate school, they would tell me, Lauren, you need to play more. And I'm like, how do you do that?
Oh yeah. This is work. Stop telling me to screw around. Yeah. But play is exploration, though.
Look at the fields we're in. Like, we're doing things we love to do. It's not about I've got to show up and clock in and do my work. No, this is somebody who wants to be an actor. These are athletes that why did we get into it? Because it makes our hearts sing, and so and then we're like, oh, and now we have to play. Right. It's this, it's a very different mindset. And I think this idea of play isn't just frivolity, but play is like a loosening of like our tight grasp on what we're doing, or tight grip or on our bodies or on our outcomes, or super hyper focus on results or on, whatever these things are down the road. And I think that is super freeing. And I think that's what he's talking about, right? We need to free ourselves and let ourselves be looser and let ourselves be more relaxed into our area of expertise, and relaxed into our skills that we have. And that's where we perform better. And it's hard. Exactly what you're saying. It's so hard for people who are hustling and grinding, like, oh, that hustle grind culture. And you're like, yeah, you can hustle and grind. And if you don't play or relax or engage your whole person, you're missing some things. And your performance in whatever field isn't authentic, or it doesn't land right, or it doesn't quite get you where you need to go. You're not an expert at, really. You're not showing your expertise by hustling and grinding constantly without play. And in a way, he's teaching you how to play. Yeah. Which is ironic. The inner game of tennis is to play. Yeah. Like, in the most joyful sense of play, in the most relaxed and engaging, and, am I going to make the cut for the next thing, or am I going to make the team, or am I going to, blah, 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 but to just play in the moment. Yeah. And you're right. I think a lot of this book is just about different ways to play, which is beautiful. It's so fun and effective. Into it too. Yeah. Yeah. You trick yourself into it, I think. Yeah, because we exactly like you were saying, we are focused on outcome, or we're focused on improvement, these types of things. Yes, and especially because the person who's going to read this book is going to go, oh, peak performance. I want peak performance. Yeah, yeah. So we're going to be like, how can I work harder? Don't. Really, I've had to define play for actors as, don't try to do it right. What do we do when we're kids and we're playing? We're not trying to do it right. And we're not trying to get it perfect. And we're not trying to we're not trying to make anybody happy either. Yeah. And so that's the play. When I just do it with, I don't care if it's right, I don't care if it's perfect, and I don't care what you think. Absolutely. That's beautiful. That old saying of dance like nobody's watching, right? Absolutely. Absolutely. That is great. I think that's a great note to end on. It's been so much fun talking with you today, Lauren. Thanks so much for joining me on the Books Applied podcast. Thank you. What a great book. Everybody go read it. Absolutely. It's out there. It's everywhere. Go find it. Go read it. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Books Applied podcast. I hope you enjoyed getting to know a new book and learning how to apply its ideas to make your work, sport, or life a little bit more awesome. For more leadership education-related content, including conflict management checklists, invitations to a fun free lunch that happens monthly, upcoming classes, webinars, and mastermind groups, please head over to wslleadership.com.
Thanks, and have a great day.